My paranormal experiences are continuation of the old school. This next event happened December the 7th of 2011. I was coming back from break, probably the first break, because I do have a time written down of 10:23 a.m. Break usually lasted between 10 o'clock to 10:15, and I was always the last one in because I had to round up kids. But anyway, I was coming back from break, and I noticed that I had some of the kids like to give me toys, for like, you're a good teacher, that kind of thing. So, or drawings, and I still have all those. So I had two little ducks that I think some of my students gave me. And I noticed that one of my two ducks was on the floor by the filter in our extra curriculum room. And as a general rule, the students were never allowed in there because that's where we kept the extra test keys, the extra score keys. And we did have one student one time, I was trying to give her some extra credit. She had gone in there and, stolen some test keys and cheated, and we caught her. It wasn't that hard to catch her. So as a rule, we said, you're never allowed in there. So I don't think a student was actually in here, but that's where I found it, in the middle of the floor. I went ahead and questioned all the kids, and they denied it. We had one student who liked to do things in a rebellious manner, and my dad questioned him. He said the student had never been in there because my dad was accounted for him. So I guess it disappeared off where I had it and then into a floor in another room. One of my students felt the sides of his shirt being pulled, both sides. So like the left and the right side just being pulled, like tugged away from his body, kind of like in the left and the right motion. One of my students felt something hit him, but he didn't know what it was. That was in January. Oh, no, it's still December. So I guess we had Christmas break. So then January of 2012, I was looking out the window, probably one of the classroom windows, because it's about 8:50 in the morning when I wrote this down. This is when it happened. I saw what looked like a person in white had just gone past the window. Now, of course, my first reaction is a stranger has wandered from outside this, in the streets or something. And I went into protective mode, like I always do. And we mainly had the doors locked pretty much, except for the one kitchen door. But I think at this time we had like a door buzzer or doorbell because, all the school shootings were going on. We felt it'd be safer to have something to protect the kids. So I would always go around inside the building and make sure no doors were ajar, which sometimes kids had a habit of doing that if like they were trying to escape. But they never did, But I couldn't find anybody. There was no cars in the parking lot because I had an vantage point where I could see most of the parking lot. So this particular window was by our copier. Our copier at that time was at the north end of the building, and I didn't see anybody outside. So then I saw a shadow on the silver strip of this big score station, and that's silver strip is like, I think I'm not really sure what that was, but we had these score stations built for us, so there might have been some kind of like a base liner or something like that, some kind of metal. I can't remember what that looked like. That was a long time ago. But anyway, the shadow was going towards the right, like it was in the classroom. I thought, well, to debunk it, I had my youngest nephew walk past it. We couldn't even see it from that vantage point, so that told me that it was probably above the score station maybe, and we're not really sure because we couldn't figure out how I could see a shadow. And then the same day, this was the really creepy thing. Some of my students were on medication, so sometimes they fell asleep. So I had one student that was asleep, and I want to say he was at his desk asleep, but everybody else in the room heard one of our windows rattling a few times. There's a railroad that goes right past our it's about a few yards away, but you could see the train from our kitchen windows, but we're in the back room. So I listened. There were no trains going by. The heater was not on. The kids were not doing anything. And then as I was writing it, I wrote that the heaters were on now, but there was no rattling because we've been in that building for so many years and the windows never rattled. You get familiar with sounds like when the icebox makes a noise, the dishwasher's done, washing the dishes after the kids do KP duty. all that kind of stuff. So whatever this was rattling the windows, it was just that one window, just one window. We had, let's see, 6 or 7 windows, but only one window was rattling, which we thought was really creepy, really weird. And I don't remember which window that was. We just heard it rattling. 2 days later, January 12th of 2012, one of my students was scoring, and we both heard a sound that sounded kind of like this. So it was like a ooh sound. It was making ups and, it was accelerating its speed up and down and up and down. It's really creepy. And then my nephew and I heard it, littler sounds, like smaller sounds of the same thing, but it seemed to come from outside. I was about to go outside and find out what it was. On the event that I had to go out and investigate anything, and if I was alone, keeping the kids safe, I would lock them in, take the keys with me, go out, and I would tell them, if I'm not back in 5 minutes, here's a number to call my dad or call 911. But, we never had to do any of that stuff. January 18th, let's see, my male student, my oldest nephew, my niece, and I heard what sounded like a little girl or a girl talking towards where my nephew and the boy sat. And I looked at them to see if it was them, and they looked at me. So that means they heard it too. One of my other students on medication, a different one, he was asleep and talking, but we could tell the difference between his voice and this voice. We couldn't figure out who this voice belonged to. Plus, it came from a different direction. I had written down that same day that the day before, I found a clothespin on the floor of our pace room. Since usually my dad and I are the only ones that go in there, we weren't sure what a clothespin was. I think we had old graduation gowns that we hung up, and some of them had to use clothespins, so somehow it fell off the hanger onto the floor, but we're not sure where that even came from. Then January 19th, my niece and I heard a little girl. My oldest nephew saw a shadow by the bathrooms. My niece saw a shimmer of a man by the wall by one of my students' desks. She said she felt a spirit. And at this time, she was probably about 7 years old. Yeah, she hadn't had her birthday yet, so she was about 7 when this happened. January 23rd, I was on my way to get new paces from the pace room when I heard a metallic sound. One of my students and my oldest nephew also heard it. So I went to go get the big scissors and went to investigate. That's what I would, and, I heard movement. That's what I would use as kind of a weapon, because even though I think by this time, maybe a little bit later on, in the state of Oklahoma, our private schools were allowed to have guns, but I did not want a gun in the building. I was licensed to do it, and my dad was also licensed because of where I worked after school. I went to training, and anyway, we did all that, but I always felt if I'm going to have a weapon, I'm going to have one that's legal. So I grabbed a large pair of scissors just in case, just for safety's sake. But I knew nobody was in the building because we had it all locked up. But you never knew if somebody, could break in. So anyway, I went to investigate, and I heard movement. I had told the kids not to make a sound or to move. I went down the hall, heard a popping noise, and I came back. A student of mine went with me. Behind me, he was carrying the hammer because he was I think the oldest male student. I don't typically allow them to do that, but we all heard the same movement, and we knew it wasn't mice. And so that really freaked us out because my dad was not there. We usually ask the parents' permission if they could usually go with me because, as a woman, I'm not as strong as even a teenage boy. They're just stronger. That's the way God made them. And so just as safety, he had a hammer and I had the pair of scissors. We searched the entire building, all the sanctuary, both wings. Well, we were already in one wing, but we didn't find anybody. So my student said he felt a cold breeze go by through him in the area around by the couch, which was by the water fountain, around the corner from our classroom. I felt it too, but on the way back. And he also heard breathing by his desk. And I wrote down that I didn't know what to think at that moment because, I didn't want to scare the kids, but I basically knew it was, a demonic spirit, ghost. The same day, a little bit later on, probably about exactly an hour, the same student was at a testing table, and I heard another metallic sound. He also heard, he said he described it as somebody jumping up and down like one time, like he jumped up and jumped back down. And then my niece had said the black chair by the computers was raised up and moved to the left. And I think she's talking about the seat had moved up from where it was, and then it moved to the left. But I'm not really sure. I can't remember how she described it. January 24th, one student of mine left the classroom. He was sad. The kids were all sad that day, but I can't remember why they were sad. I wrote down that I couldn't recall why the kids were sad, so I'm not sure. But I heard an electronic chirp, kind of like a battery low on a cell phone. And sometimes my students snuck cell phones in, so we would always confiscate them and tell the parents, hey, they're not, parents know they're not allowed to have a cell phone at their desk because they would end up playing games on it or whatever. But back then, I don't think cell phones had that. But anyway, this particular student said he didn't have a cell phone. And I think he emptied out his pockets just to show me, because I didn't ask him to, but I think he did it anyway. And he did not have a cell phone, so we don't know what that was. Then we all heard a guy clear his throat. My oldest nephew heard a woman talking in the kitchen. The next day, my dad and I were in the kitchen talking. That's where if we had to talk in private, that's where we usually did it, We both heard a female voice talking. To me, it sounded like someone saying Miss Dawn. So one student was asleep on the couch, which is really close to us, so I knew it wasn't him. So we all came back in the learning center and asked if anyone said it, and nobody else did. I wrote down that it was weird because it sounded like somebody said Miss Dawn, like somebody needed something. I did always tell the students, we're out of the classroom for whatever reason, like going to the bathroom, fixing lunches, or making copies for faxes because it was down another wing. If it was an emergency, they were allowed to yell for us, like if somebody was sick or somebody passed out from having a seizure, because you never know what is going to happen. If they saw somebody staring at them in the windows from outside, anything like that. So that's what I thought was going on there. But all the kids said no, they didn't hear anything. So I thought that was weird. So when I was at work, there was a guy who was across the street from our school building. He was visiting his friend. And he said, now this is really creepy. So this would be after hours, like near 2:00 in the morning. He said they were outside and they saw a light come on in the building at 1:00. And then it went off near 2 in the morning. He said he was in a position to see there was 5 doors to that place. He couldn't see one of them, but there's no way nobody could have got in there because it was deadlocked, but he said nobody went in or came out of the building. That was creepy because the only ones with keys in that neighborhood were my immediate family, which mainly I don't think my brothers had keys at that point, but my dad and I did. And at this time I was still living at home because I hadn't moved out yet. They didn't see any vehicles around, so nobody broke in. And he told me that at work, he said something really weird happened at your school building last night. So he told me that, and I was really freaked out by that. We didn't find anything that looked like it was disturbed in there. Like somebody, we thought if somebody broke in, we'd see the glass all over the floor, something to be stolen like TVs, VCRs, but nothing was disturbed. So we're not sure why the light was on for a whole hour and then went off. February 1st, we didn't have any chapel because my dad was gone. And we all heard what sounded like a tornado siren going off, but fainter. So I went out to the kitchen, and the kids told me that it was still going on. I opened the back door. It got quiet. My mom, who was across the street, said she didn't hear it either. And I'm familiar with all the farming equipment around here, and I wrote down that I can't imagine any machinery around here doing what I've heard, and I've never heard anything like it before. Same day, I was going into my office, getting my stuff ready to leave, which I was leaving for my other job, my second job. I heard this loud, raspy male voice whisper my name, and it sounded like it was in my office. My dad said it wasn't him. The other kids didn't even hear it, and they said it wasn't this particular student who liked to pretend to be, spooky. I never wrote down anything that I think that he did, because that would mean he did it and not a ghost. February 6th, the student was asleep again. He was heavily on medication to help calm him down and stuff. We all felt the floorboard shakes because it was carpeted, but it was also made out of wood, I do believe. My niece was taping in her word building words, which is what public schools would call spelling words. They always had to tape them inside their PACE workbook. And she said something pressed into it and made an indentation. She couldn't tell what it was. Then at 10:02, the kids are at break and I'm by myself in the classroom. And I felt the left side of my desk shake, but we didn't have an earthquake at that time because we're prone to having lots of earthquakes. We could feel them. After break, the kids came in and told me there were my niece, one of my nephews, and another student heard a kick to the silver TV, like somebody kicked the silver TV. I guess it was on the floor or something. February 14th, one of my students came back from the bathroom and heard a spray sound come from the preschool room. There was nobody in there, and he ran back because he was scared. 3 male students all smelled cigarette smoke in the school. My niece and oldest nephew was absent, and my other nephew had a stopped up nose, so he couldn't smell it. So for some reason, we all smelled cigarette smoke, and, obviously nobody smokes in school. Trust me, if their breath smelled like smoke, we would know it. So the next entry I wrote was April 5th. So I'm assuming the rest of February and all of March, nothing really happened, which was a blessing and a relief. One of my students, the one who usually is heavily medicated, he left school early because I think he was sick. The other student was absent. So it was just another male student, myself, and my niece. I don't know about my nephews where they were, but we all heard what sounded like some kid moaning in pain, and we heard it 3 different times. My sister, she used to be our preschool teacher. I think she was up here for some reason. I can't remember, but I wrote down that she heard her name whispered while she was over here. And then I stood at the Learning Center's entrance, and I could plainly hear footsteps in the kitchen and hallway down by the bathrooms, which would be the south wing. April 17th, the one student that was heavily medicated, when I say heavily medicated, I mean it always made him sleepy. He was just always heavy and just hardly got any work done. We could not wake that poor kid up, so I'm not going to wake him up if he's sleepy, So anyway, he heard his name called when he was in the kitchen, and he said it sounded like it was by the storage room by the boys' bathroom. There's a women's bathroom, boys' bathroom, and then the storage room. So that's the last room on that wall by the exit door. April 18th, my niece heard her name whispered one time. Then she was eating her noodles after recess, and she heard a man's deep voice say, "Help," by the hall entrance down there by the bathrooms. And that's where that activity is mostly at, is by the bathrooms, because that's where a seance was done back in the 1980s. My niece was in the kitchen. She heard a man say, "Cupcake." There was a student who was down there by the bathroom, so I asked him, and he said he didn't say it, so I believe him, because he doesn't have a man's voice yet. It's being a teenager. But I always had to rule them out, just to clarify that I investigated it, and it wasn't them. We kind of moved on from there. April 23rd, my oldest nephew went to the bathroom and said on his way down there, he heard the front door from the preschool room or pre-K room to the girls' bathroom open and shut. My niece was in the kitchen and heard a sound like water coming out of a faucet, but she didn't see it because she was in there, and so she just only heard it. So then this happened to me. I was down the hallway on my cell phone with my dad, probably talking about school stuff, not related to paranormal. My niece said she heard a man's voice say, "Wow," with an exclamation point. And then, we had school the rest of April and half of May. So then we had the next entries in August when school started back up, probably about a couple weeks later. We were eating lunch early, and my oldest nephew was changing his clothes. Since he's autistic, he's scared to death of the bathroom. I think this happened when he would only change his shirt, I think, because he didn't want to get his shirt dirty. He was very germophobic. He didn't want to get that dirty, and he was getting ready to go play outside after we ate lunch. So he went down to change clothes, but he wouldn't go in the bathroom. I didn't discover that until I think this incident, because I saw what looked like his arm sleeve by the bathroom wall. And that told me he was not changing clothes in the bathroom when he needed to, but he denied it. So, because I thought maybe he was hugging the wall. There's this little entryway that you can't see the bathrooms from the hallway. You have to actually go down there, and then they're tucked in a offset of the wall. He denied it, so I'm pretty sure it wasn't him, and he probably was in the bathroom changing, but he made a habit of, not changing. And I said, no, you've got to go into the bathroom. It's not good to change, outside the bathroom. September 12th was a Wednesday, and the youth were at church. They would use a building on Wednesday nights and Sunday nights. Well, my nephews were both in the youth class. And towards the end of youth, my oldest nephew went to the bathroom. He said the hall lights were on. He came out, felt the cold air, felt someone try to trip him. He sat down back in the classroom or whatever. I think they were in the auditorium. And he said he saw scratches on both of his arms. And that's when he came over to the church building and showed me. And I saw them. They were all over his arms in groups of threes, and a few on his right arm. And I drew a little diagram about, so like his left arm was all scratched up, front and back, all over. His right arm just had 3 different spots of 3 scratches each. I wrote that in there because I was sure it was ghostly, but he had a habit of creating things and pretending it was a ghost, so I wasn't for sure because I didn't see him getting scratched because I was in a completely different building. October 11th was the next one, and this is when my dad was in a foreign country doing mission work. He was in Nepal. So all these events I'm about to say happened. I want to say that I was by myself. I don't know if my mom was there helping out or not, because I know she had to take over. Somebody had to take over after I left for work. Okay, that Monday, which was October 11th, I do believe. No, this was a Thursday that I wrote this down. I'm sorry, I keep hearing some noises in my own house now. I was at my house, and the trunk of my car wouldn't start, and it was partially open. So I don't know if that was, by this time I had moved out, and I'm living where I'm living now. So I think I wrote that down because it just led up to the events, I think. Because I think the woman I bought the house from said that her mother, who lived here, heard things. I thought, well, great, that's all I need. I get out of one house that was haunted into a building that's haunted into my own house that's now haunted. That's why I started writing this down, because I was getting ready to go to school. Tuesday, I came in first, and I found the auditorium door open with the spotlight on, which was weird. So the music leader, who's also the youth leader, told me that his band group did not go in there because they didn't ask him for the key. I think they were on, sometimes they would have school breaks or something like that. And I told them they cannot come into the building while we're having school, because their school would be out and ours would not be out. Okay, Wednesday, my niece and a student and his mother who was helping me, so that must be the woman who helped out, all heard banging noises coming from inside the building, down the hallway by the bathrooms. And we had a man from our church. He was repairing something, and he was already gone by that time, so it was not him. I wrote down today, which would be Thursday. I came in and found the door by the water fountain open, which there are 2 double doors, and that was open. And it wasn't just unlocked, but someone had obviously pushed the bar. Oh, I'm sorry, this would be the door that leads outside. So the door by the water fountain was open, and somebody had pushed the bar and used the key to unbolt it. And it was ajar. So that was alarming, because, anybody from off the street could have come in and done that. But we never did find out what had happened there. The week or 2 prior to these events, sometimes my oldest nephew would tell me stuff. He said he swears that he had 4 packages of ramen noodles in the green bowl on Monday. Tuesday, he only had 1, and Wednesday, he didn't have any. Usually we had school 4 days a week, Monday through Thursday. Sometimes the kids would leave their lunches set for the whole week so they wouldn't forget, so he said he didn't have anything for lunch. So then we have what's called homework slips. Like if a student needs a homework, they would take home a homework slip and say what they need homework in, and they would have to bring it back with a parent's signature. And if they didn't, they got in trouble. They would get demerits and stuff. So I'm very organized. So I always have enough supplies so I don't have to order them at the last minute because I don't like doing that. And so I knew I had enough homework slip pads prior to school beginning. And here, this is in October. All of a sudden I had run out and there was only 4 students, which I thought was weird. So it seemed like somebody had stolen them or they just disappeared. And then I noticed there was the window by the copier. I noticed that it was on the inside. It was crooked, as if somebody tried to open it. I checked outside and it was a little bit loose. October 15th. Now I would allow the kids to play pranks and I'd play pranks on the kids and we'd laugh, kind of to ease the tension of the building being haunted. So we would do the same things that the ghosts would do, like call each other names, whisper names, and laugh and stuff. So my niece had turned around, or she had asked me if I said her name today. I told her no. She said she described it as a mean female voice that was lowered, but they also didn't finish saying her name, like they cut off saying her name. I told her no. We didn't do it every day, so we just did it sometimes, I told her no, I did not do that. November 5th, I was missing a notepad in the shape of an ice cream, but I couldn't find it. And I had looked everywhere, like through my desk, the office. I never did find it, I don't think. But I did take a picture of the remaining 4 notepads that I had of that. Okay, November 20th, I wrote down that on November 8th, outside about 11:40 a.m., and this is a really creepy thing that I saw. It was after lunch, because we usually eat lunch between 11 and 11:30-ish or 11:40, so we would always go outside. And I would always do a perimeter check pretty much all the time, And I saw this black thing outside go over the lower roof of our school building, and it wasn't an animal. It looked like a very long and wide scarf, but it was too fast. And it was not windy at all. In fact, there was not even a breeze, which is unprecedented for our state because we're a very windy state. My oldest nephew was with me, but he didn't see it. And the way this thing did, it went around the bell tower like it was dancing in the wind. It wasn't a trash bag because it was way too long for a trash bag. I would say it would have to be several feet long, maybe longer than a person. So maybe 6 to 7 feet long and probably about maybe a foot wide or foot and a half or maybe 2 feet wide. It was that long. It was just really creepy. So when it went over, and I was at the back of the building, so we walked over and I was watching it just dance in the air, just curl around and dance. And then it just went over. So I raced over with my nephew running with me. There was nothing over there. If it had been trash, I would have seen it, even though there was no wind. So I don't know, it's very rare for us to see things outside the building. So the day before, November 19th, my niece said she heard her name being called again. January 10th, 2013, my niece asked me if I said her name, and I said no. And I said, I told her I was too tired to play that joke on her today. Because I usually said I call her name when she's not working. So usually if she's just daydreaming, I'll whisper her name, not to scare her on that point, because, I whisper it so that I don't disturb the other kids. And she said, well, it sounded just like you. I said, well, it wasn't me. January 23rd, it was just me, my oldest nephew, or both my nephews, and we all heard a loud noise in the kitchen. It sounded like the popping of a milk jug, like if it was cold. This was wintertime, so I thought, well, we didn't even have a milk jug. And I checked, and there was nothing there. February 7th, my niece asked me again if I said her name. I said I didn't. Neither did my 2 nephews, and the other student was absent for the day. She said, well, it was a female voice, and it spoke really fast. Then my oldest nephew told me the day before that 2 weeks prior to that, in youth class, he'd looked out the kitchen window by the sinks and saw a circle of light on the playground, but he didn't see a person out there at all. And I want to say he might have saw a flashlight, but he said no, it wasn't a flashlight. So I'm not sure what he saw. February 21st, my niece was getting a drink, and they don't usually drink out of the water fountain. So they would always get their drink that they would bring for lunch. And she said she came back fast and said that one of the bathroom doors had opened, closed, and opened again. And she knew nobody was down there because we only had like 4 students and everybody else was in the classroom. But, oh, well, actually, no, this one student and the mother was gone. Okay, so while she was telling the story, we all heard a metallic bang to my right. No one else was in here. My dad, the student, and the mother were all gone. Sometimes they had doctor's appointments and stuff, or they were sick. February 26th, my niece was at the testing table, and I was at Dad's computer, probably working on school stuff. My niece said, "Did you hear that, Aunt Dawn?" And I said, "No, what?" She said, "Someone whispered, 'Come here,' from your office." She couldn't tell me the sex of the voice. Then all 4 of us heard 2 loud metal bangs again. And my oldest nephew said he saw something big and black and big outside, but he couldn't describe what it was. March 7th, my niece again asked me if I said her name. She said no. She said it sounded like a long, drawn-out whisper that said it 2 times and 5 seconds apart. She couldn't determine the sex of that voice either. Okay, after chapel, this is March 13th. After chapel, we all came in, my 2 nephews, my niece, the student, his mother, and my dad and I. My oldest nephew was absent the day before because he had a doctor's appointment. I think around that time he was diagnosed with diabetes or somewhere around, maybe I think in February he was, so this was probably a follow-up. My oldest nephew said, "Where's my blue pen?" Since he wasn't here the day before, I didn't even know it had been missing. He held up a pen that was turquoise in color. They're not allowed to have turquoise. My niece said, "That's my pen, but I have a blue pen that's not mine." Well, the turquoise pen was probably one of her drawing pens. So I switched them back for him, and I asked everyone if they did it, and they all said no. So we're not sure what happened there. And the day before, my niece had asked where her blue pen was, like my oldest nephew's. It was a Bic pen, and I looked at my nephew's desk and saw a blue and black Bic pen, but those were his. So I found it very strange that some pens were missing and all that. And I want to say that I took pictures of it, but I'm not 100% sure. Not that that would matter, but I just documented some things. So days later, on March 27th, we came back from break. My 2 nephews and I went to class. My niece was sick at home, or at my mom's house because my sister was working. My dad had a meeting in another city. The mother, who was my substitute teacher for when I wasn't there, she said she went to the bathroom. Her son was in the kitchen alone because he liked to follow her around, make sure, he's being protective of his mother. I was in the copy room making a copy, and I thought I heard her talking to her son, but she was still in the bathroom. And the hallway is way too long, so they couldn't be talking. The son came back and said he heard a woman whisper his name. And he said it was really soft from down the hallway, the creepy hallways, what the kids called it. That's the hallway by the bathrooms. Now, where I was making a copy, probably at that time would be in the learning center, but we might have moved the copier down the hall, so I knew he wasn't down there with his mom. Same day, I heard what sounded like music. At the same time, the mother thought she heard humming, really soft humming, and then we both heard a moaning sound that was really soft. April 16th, we had a new student that arrived. He was more like a foreign exchange student, I think, from another country. I can't remember the name of the country, but it was my niece and 2 nephews, myself, and this other student. Those were the only ones present for this day. So my oldest nephew was sitting in the chair next to me because I was helping him with English. Sometimes I allowed him to drag a chair and sit at my desk. My niece was at my desk as well because I was helping her with her math. I can multitask. Like if I'm waiting on one to finish a problem, I can help the other student. So I heard one loud, unusual bang coming from what seemed like the other hallway. 1 to 2 seconds later, it was followed by a second bang. My niece said, "I heard that," with an exclamation point. She was really scared. I said, "Me too. I'll go check it out." I checked it out and I didn't find anything. And my niece said, whenever I came back, she says, I was beginning to worry about you because you took so long. That building's huge, so it took me a while to check it out. So I texted and told the mother of the other student. She was gone for the day, so I was texting her wherever she was at. And she told me that the day before, after I left, my niece had heard someone open the door. The mother checked, but nobody was there. Okay, so I was writing this about 10:43 by this time because I'd take time to do my work and come back. So I wrote down, as I was writing this down, I heard footsteps that sounded like they were in the room, but only my oldest nephew and I heard it. And I was watching the new student's feet, and he didn't move his feet, so I knew that wasn't him. April 30th, 2013. The other day, my oldest nephew told me that the reason he wants someone to walk him to the bathrooms is because he sees a large black shape moving outside both bathrooms very fast. And he said the girls' bathroom shades are always closed, and this building it's really high up, so nobody can actually walk past the building or the windows unless you're like 7 foot tall or more. And we did not have a lot of those people around this area. They were 7 foot tall. So that's where I'm going to stop for this time.
If you've had a paranormal experience and would like to be a guest on the show, please contact us by going to myparax.com. That's myparaex.com. Thanks for listening.